We'll resume and take up where Mr. Saxon left off. Mr. Saxon.
Thank you very much. Admiral, understanding that the first two DDG 1000s were placed under contract just a couple of weeks ago, I believe, far later than was originally planned. In fact, I think the original plan was to place them under contract in the third quarter of 07, and we ended up getting it done in the second quarter of 08. Quite a slip. What would be the impact of a strategic pause in the procurement of the third DDG 1000, which is in this year's budget request, and instead using those funds to procure additional DDG 51s and possibly to accelerate the development of CGX technologies? This could allow the Navy to also gain additional cost and schedule performance data for the DDG 1000 before committing to buying a third. And I think you made some good points about wanting to reduce crew size and developing the capability to do that. Certainly we can do that in DDG 1001 and 2, and use the resources that we might use on a postponed DDG 1003. Shipyards have said that they could resume construction of DDG 51s relatively easily, and so this looks to me to be a common sense alternate route for us to take. What do you think if we postponed the DDG 1003 until 09 or 10?
Mr. Saxon, as you began your question, what would be the impact of doing that? And as you understand, there are many facets, and it's a fairly complex question that I would like to take for the record, if I may.
Would you agree that at least that it is a common sense, logical alternative?
I believe that being able to ensure that our combatant capability and capacity, that we can maximize that, is something that I believe needs to be looked at, because the force structure that we have, and as I mentioned, we don't get to 313 until 2019. Capacity becomes a capability unto itself, and I am always looking at ways to make sure that we have the capability and capacity that we need.
Sure.
And I'll defer to the Secretary as well.
If you want to take it for the record, that's fine, but I would hope that you would get back to us in a relatively short period of time, because obviously whatever plans we decide to make relative to authorization and later appropriation, we need to have your thoughts, which are very important to us, in a relatively short period of time, if that's possible.
Sir. Congressman, I would note that the delay that you referred to was associated with the definitization of the contract, not with the start of the contract. We've been maintaining the course and speed in terms of the actual contract activity. We went through a rather extensive negotiation process to ensure that we understood all of the cost and schedule issues associated with that program and definitized the contract fairly recently. The activity has been going on. We effectively have a hiatus year in 08, in as much as the contracts were started previously in a dual leadship approach. And I'm very mindful of the need to be able to maintain the course of activity, not only to ensure that we're able to get the ships to the fleet as needed, but also to avoid any unnecessary perturbations to the industrial base, which I view as very fragile and in need of consistency in terms of effort.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ortiz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, Admiral General, thank you so much for your service to our country. We certainly appreciate it. Like the Army, to meet current demands, the Marine Corps has drawn from preposition stocks around the world. These stocks are vital to our rapid deployment capability. Last week, the Secretary of the Army spoke to the risk that has been assumed in the Army's response time by the consumption of pre-positioning stocks coupled with the delay in replenishment and the strain of current operations. General Conway, how much equipment is being drawn from the Marine Corps pre-positioning stock, and at what percentage are they currently filled? And what is the plan and the timeline for restoration of the pre-stocks that we so definitely need? And what level of risk has been created by the downloads of these stocks? And maybe you can enlighten not only me, but the committee.
Sure. Sir, first of all, about roughly speaking, about 25% of our equipment is in the central region, either in Iraq or in some cases perhaps soon to be Afghanistan. With regard to our pre-positioning stocks aboard ship and both in the aboard the ships and in the cave in Norway, we have MPS-1 that is currently in retrofit right now, and it's roughly 40 to 50% of its capacity is there. We used it to draw down to provide equipment to the new forces that we are creating. MPS-2 was used to draw down for OIF, and it's at about 50 to 55% capacity. A lot of the equipment, when it is retrograded from Iraq, will be evaluated and put back aboard that ship. MPS-3 is at 100%, and it's available for tasking worldwide. In the caves, we're at about 40 to 50% again at this point in terms of equipment sets. There is some risk, of course, associated with that. What we find is that we're not able to fully fit out our battalions who are in the States with full table of equipment sets. We have to go to what we call training sets in order to be able to allow them to function when they're home on their dwell period and to prepare themselves to go to Iraq. One technique or one methodology that is fairly dramatically different from what the Army is experiencing, though, is that we leave our equipment in theater by and large, both with regards to the battalions and the squadrons, and each successive rotation simply falls in on that gear. Now, some of that gear is cycled out because it gets worn pretty hard and put away wet in some cases. So we have sort of a fresh infusion either of new equipment or of replacement equipment as it wears out. But that's an ongoing effort that our people have been able to manage fairly effectively over the last couple of years now.
Because if I can remember correctly, when the Army testified before our committee, they told us that it would take at least until about the year 2011, maybe 2012, to restock the prepositioning elements that we have out there, you know, and it takes time to build, it takes time to refeed, and I'm just concerned, you know, with what I've seen and where we're at.
Sir, I think it's really hard to provide you a date in time to say we will be well by this date certain. Because it's a dynamic. We're wearing equipment out even as we sit here today in discussion in Iraq and again to be in Afghanistan. We don't know exactly when the crisis is going to end. I think what we have agreed to with the Army is that there will probably need to be at least a couple of years of what we would call reset monies to be able to determine where we are, what is needed, and either repair old equipment or buy new equipment if we're at that plateau.
And one last question, you know, I am concerned with what I have been reading and seeing on TV, and I'm just wondering, should we be concerned with what's happening in Central America now with you know, the potential conflict there with Colombia and Ecuador and Venezuela, and is this something that we should worry about?
Well, of course, sir, I think any time you've got nations with friction, it is cause for concern. Not being the international expert here in the crowd, I would simply refer back, I think, to what our boss said recently, Secretary Gates, and that he does not see any immediate concern for conflict there.
And the reason I worry about this is because it's right in our own backyard.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. My time is up. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Mr. Hunter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, excuse me for stepping out there during your testimony, Mr. Secretary. Let me ask you, and maybe this question has been asked, but the plan is, the Navy plan for 313 ships includes 11 carriers. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
But right now you've got the current plan also generates a strike fighter shortfall of about 125 aircraft in the 2017 timeframe. Is that right?
We're still reevaluating that based on the Service Life Assessment Program, which is going to be coming out here in the next couple months.
Okay. But if in fact that occurs, that your current plan is followed, that's 125 aircraft. You've got about 44 aircraft per carrier air wing. So we're really talking about 3 carrier air wings of being short 3 carrier air wings, are we not?
Mr. Hunter, the Navy, the blue portion of the strike fighter shortfall is 69 airplanes. But what it really does for us is it hampers our ability to generate the air wings at the pace that we need for the fleet response plan. And
yeah, the 125 includes the Marine Corps.
That's correct.
Yes, shortfall.
That's correct.
Well, now does that? But again, if you even 69, you got basically 1.5 carrier air wings short, right? That's is that another way of saying that you don't you think we don't need to have 11 carriers?
No, sir, not at all. What it says is that that based on our inventory, the ability for us to generate the number of ready carriers and air wings will be affected by this drop. And that's why I've highlighted that, because we have found in recent years that our fleet response plan, the way that we have been able to operate the carriers, has really allowed us to have much more striking power, much more responsiveness to events around the world than we had even a few short years ago. So as we go into our fiscal year 10 budget, that's going to be one of the top things that we'll be working on. I also think that it's important as we look toward the Joint Strike Fighter that any delays in that program could have the potential to exacerbate that strike fighter shortfall.
Yeah. Well, I understand that, and that may well be a problem that you got. Do we have the ability to increase the production line of the E's and F's if we have to?
I believe the ability is there to do that, but again, we want to be able to take a look at our assessment of our current Hornets and then fold in potential solutions as we prepare our fiscal year 10 budget.
Okay. And again, lastly, Mr. Secretary, I think it's important for us to look at this this very strong production of and acquisition of submarines that China is undertaking, and that this very static model that we've got, or plan that we've got, going up even to 2 boats a year, is going to provide us with a very limited force. And I'll tell you what really jumped out at me was when the committee kind of dragged out of the Navy after a lot of consternation this figure as to your warfighting commanders in the Pacific, your submarine commanders, who are requesting boats, requesting submarines for missions. And the fact that while you met, I think the critical missions, you met all the critical missions, they only met between, I believe it was 56 and 65%. We only had enough submarines for between 56 and 65% of high priority submarine missions. That's a lot. That's a big gap. And it doesn't appear to me that we have any even mitigating this this shortage with your operational changes. It appears to me we're still going to have a major gap in the long term, and we're going to have other nations out there that are producing robust fleets of submarines, and we are now shackled with these very high costs in excess, well above $2 billion per attack boat. And yet with a real requirement that we're going to have to meet. Any thoughts on that?
Well, sir, a number of items there. First of all, relative to the immediate issue, as I think you're aware, we've gone through a reallocation of our submarine fleet, our attack fleet. 60-40 split, with 60% of that now being in the Pacific, to adapt the fleet and ensure it's in an approximate area where we see the principal threats. We're going through a series of activities to ensure that they are higher availability provided by the fleet in terms of working the individual maintenance availabilities there and improving their deployability. We're also going through a series of activities to reduce the cost of future submarines. As you're aware, putting in significant new design efforts on the Virginia-class, redoing the entire bow section here shortly to be able to continue to drop the cost of that boat down further. That said, I'm pleased that we're able to accelerate one additional boat here in the most recently submitted budget. It was a bit of a squeeze and a little difficult to do, but I think it was, on balance, the right thing to do.
Okay, just last question then. Admiral Roughead, maybe you can answer this. When we did this hearing on subs here a couple of years ago, and we extracted from the Navy this fact that you couldn't get up to any more than 65% of high-priority missions being filled with subs, and we had more than we have now when you had that number. Can you assure the committee that you can get up to with the factors that the Secretary's just described, that you can get even to 75% of high priority missions being filled with submarines over the next 4 to 5 years? Right. Even a 75% mission fulfillment.
If I may, Mr. Hunter, I was the commander in the Pacific, and I relied very heavily on my submarines to meet the missions that we had there. And as you pointed out, we met all of the critical missions, and our submariners do absolutely unbelievable work, in much of which is things that we don't talk about in a venue like this. But the missions that come in are missions that are generated every year. So to be able to say what a percentage of the changing requirements by the combatant commanders will be, I'm not sure that we know what is going to be out there. But that said, our addressal of all of the critical missions and the high priority missions of which I had insight into and was responsible for apportioning the submarines, I was very comfortable with where we are, not just for those missions, but also any responses that we had to provide for our submarine force. I was comfortable with that. That said,
well, now, Admiral, you missed 40% of the missions that you requested submarines for if you were running the subs at the time that these numbers were generated. It was that you were missing between 35 and 45% of what you classified.
No, sir, not what I classified. These are the worldwide combatant commander missions that we were dealing with.
What the Navy classified as high priority missions, they didn't have enough submarines for. And so I think it's important for us to develop a plan where we can meet high priority mission requirements. And I think when you say, well, we never know where the requirements are going to go, the implication of your question is something wonderful may happen and they may go down. I don't think in that part of the Pacific where we're shifting some attention now, the requirements are going to reduce over the next 5 to 10 years. Do you see that for submarines?
In the Pacific, as we have done, we have moved more submarines to the Pacific. We have based our submarines more forward in Guam.
Why don't we try to have maybe get a classified answer, Mr. Chairman, for the committee as to what percentage of high priority missions can now be fulfilled as a result of these adjustments at some point. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection, please do.
If you could do that, that'd be
good. Before I call on Mr. Taylor, let me express a concern and ask Mr. Secretary if he would get back to us at a later moment on the record for this. I'm concerned that the military to civilian conversion in the Navy medical community is included in the 09 budget. However, last year there was a prohibition in the law of military to civilian conversions and extends till 2012. And I'm not quite understanding that situation. Would you get back to me on that on the record later?
We'd be pleased to, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Secretary. Commandant, Admiral, thank you very much for being here. First off, let me thank all of you for your cooperation on trying to get wounded warriors to the Merchant Marine Academy as instructors and coaches, and I hope that becomes the norm for all of our military academies. You know, we've tried for a couple of years to work with systems integrators, and that didn't work out very well. The Navy's taking it back in-house. And I'm, for one, frustrated with how slowly things have been developing. So, Admiral, I'm going to turn things around, and we're going to, maybe the Sea Power Subcommittee is going to become a true systems integrator that's accountable to the taxpayers and the voters. Having said that, I'm intending to propose to the subcommittee that money be included to upscale a DD-51 hull large enough to carry the nuclear A-1B power plant, and that would be the CGX. In the meantime, we would limit the number of DD-1000s to 2. We would continue the 51 line and go to the nuclear cruiser sooner. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. Rather than waiting for y'all to come to a proposal to us, we're going to make that proposal to you, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. Secondly, going back to Mr. Hunter's concerns, and they're very valid concerns, about some rumor of the Navy going down to 10 carriers. I would think a flat request to go from 11 carrier task force to 10 would probably be dead on arrival with this committee. On the other hand, a very good point has been made that you spend about $2 billion to get an additional 2 years out of the enterprise. So if an alternative proposal was made, that rather than spending $2 billion to get an additional 2 years out of the enterprise, that you would spend that $2 billion building a large deck amphib or an additional submarine or the first of the nuclear cruisers, well, then we might have something to talk about. And I think several members of this committee might feel a little differently at that, because tomorrow never seems to get here when we say we're not going to buy it this year, but we'll get to it. Tomorrow just never seems to get here. It certainly hadn't in the case of the LCS. So I would like to hear your thoughts on those two things. I would also very much like to remind the Commandant that I'm very much aware that your number one unfunded request is the LPD, and that we would hope the Marine Corps does its very best to convince the Senate of the importance of that program. We passed it through this committee last year. The appropriators came through. We didn't get much help out of the Senate. Again, I would hope that you would use your arts of persuasion to get them on board with that very worthwhile request. Sure. Commandant, I'm going to go back to the proposal I made to you and let you tear up my ideas for a change.
No, sir. Mr. Taylor, I always appreciate your ideas and recommendations, particularly as they apply to shipbuilding, because I know that you spend a great deal of time studying it and looking for the best way for us to get to our common goal, which is to have more ships in our Navy. But with respect to the enterprise funding being used for ship construction, the problem that we have right now is that the $2.2 billion that we would spend on enterprise is going to have to come from something already. So that's one of the reasons why the...
If I may, Admiral, if this committee continues to tell you you have to do it,
right,
then you would have to identify that something. So if you've got to identify that something anyway, then I would think, and you have concerns about spending $2 billion just to get another 2 years out of one 50-year-old ship, then I would think a very reasonable alternative to give to this committee, which a number of members have expressed their concerns about the fleet getting too small. You've expressed your concerns about not having enough combatants, is to come back and say, let me spend that money on a combatant that I'll get 30 years out of.
Sure. And I just might add that the $2.2 billion really is 7 months of usable service of the
You're making
carrier.
the case even better.
But so it does become a little bit problematic to be able to move money that we.
But at the moment, it's your problem.
Exactly, okay. And I'm not deflecting that at all. With regard to upscaling the DDG-51 to a nuclear ship, I've I've commissioned and have served as the commanding officer of a DDG 51. I'm not a marine architect or marine engineer or a naval architect, but I'm not sure that hull form can upscale to that. And I think
if I
that's...
may, I've got the red light. What I need from you is a cost estimate from Admiral Sullivan, what it would cost to make that determination.
Right, I'll do that,
And how
sir.
quickly that determination can be made so we move things along.
Yes, sir, I'll do that.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Bartlett.
Thank you. I'd just like to note that the chairman of our subcommittee has his ranking member's support for these issues. Gentlemen, thank you all very much for your service. It's supporting you in that service that's a large part of the reason I keep coming back here in my 82nd year of life. Thank you so much for what you do for your country. It's often overlooked that helicopters are an essential factor in the Navy's ability to project force around the world. For instance, they're involved in search and rescue, medical evacuation, anti-mine countermeasures, and wouldn't it be nice if they could be involved in swapping the mission packages on the LCS at sea so it doesn't have to steam to port to do that. As all of you know, several members of this committee have been concerned for some time that the Navy's necking down a business strategy, before 9/11, by the way, has left a gap in a critical range of vertical lift capability. I've argued for some time that the Navy should invest in a robust, heavy-medium lift helicopter that will provide greater capability than the H-60 alone and at far less cost than the super-heavy MH-53, which is several years off, of course. For instance, the 60 is really compromised in search and rescue. It does not have the range or the dwell time. It's really compromised in medical evacuation. It just isn't big enough for any meaningful airborne emergency room. It is compromised in anti-mine countermeasures because of the way it must tow, and it's just not big enough to swap off the mission packages on the LCS. As a matter of fact, it's my understanding that it's already failed 2 of these critical missions. Admiral Roughead, I shared these concerns with you recently at a private meeting. You assured me that Fleet Forces Command is currently studying this very issue. Would you share with the committee some specifics of this study? What is its scope? Is it a broad, across the enterprise analysis? When will the results of the study be available to the committee? I have here a presentation you made at your service made at 3 October 07 subcommittee hearing, and you have a timeline there that says that this report was going to be available November of last year, just when it will be available. Does the study look at the cost and capability benefits of available platforms outside the Navy's current inventory, including how these aircraft could be integrated into a future fleet that includes the LCS and sea basing? Thank you.
Sir, what the Fleet Forces Command has been asked to do is to determine whether there's a need for a medium lift helicopter. It was driven in part by your interest in our helicopter fleet and where we are going, but also from the standpoint of trying to look ahead in the future to determine what some of the logistics requirements are going to be. The weights of things, for example, such as the engines for the Joint Strike Fighter. Those are things that we looked ahead and said, you know, let's take a look and see if there is a need for a medium lift helicopter. And that is what they are doing. And that study is to inform us as we develop our fiscal year 10 budget.
If the 60 has already failed 2 of these critical mission tests, isn't that adequate justification to seriously look at a medium lift helicopter? It is true that it has, in preliminary tests, failed, has it not?
Sir, I'm going to have to look into that. The reports of failures have not been made to me, and I will get back to you on this.
We're very concerned that a legitimate business model that was put in place prior to 9/11 is now committing us to a future where our helicopters neck down to just one, joined later on, several years from now, by the huge 53, which is too big for any of the admission. The most costly per hour plane we fly, I think, is that big helicopter. And we're concerned that this legitimate business model that made sense prior to 9/11, with the commitments that we now have, just really compromises us. And we feel that this needs to have a new look and to put in that long spectrum of priorities. And we think that it just comes high enough to the top that we really do need a medium lift helicopter. You just can't do search and rescue, medical evacuation, anti-mine countermeasures missions, or LCS at sea swap off with the 60, can you?
That's what we're looking at, sir, is what do we need for the future? I would say that our fleet of 60 helicopters and the men and women who fly and operate those helicopters do an incredible job for our Navy in areas such as ASW, search and rescue. We have some of our squadrons that are flying medevacs in combat conditions ashore. So the 60 helicopter is a good airplane. It is serving us well. The fact, though, that we wanted to look into the future and see what the medium lift requirements would be and what investments we would have to make, that's what has prompted the tasking to Fleet Forces Command.
I thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Arkansas, Dr. Schneider.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you for being here and thank you for your service. General Conway, yesterday Admiral Fallon was here, the CENTCOM commander, and in response to questions, I think, from both Ms. Sanchez and Mr. Thornberry, he said that he needed 2,000 more troops. In addition to the 3,200 troops that Marines that you're in the process of deploying, he said he needed 2,000 more. Do you have the ability to give him 2,000 more troops?
No, sir, we do not. This employment of 3,400 Marines into Afghanistan will keep us at what I would call surge plus from about later this month, March through May, until such time as we stand down the 2 battalions of surge forces in Iraq and they're not replaced. That will put us then at 8 battalions committed on through October. That keeps us at a surge rate through that period of time where we can expect no better than a 1-to-1 deployment to dwell.
Secretary, Winter, we've had a lot of statements made over the last several years that will respond to the folks on the ground about what they need. Admiral Fallon's testimony is sitting right there. He needs 2,000 more troops. Does it concern you we don't have the ability to find those 2,000 more?
Oh, sir, that is a matter of total force management that involves all of the services, and I think that the Marine Corps has been growing its force to be able to build to the
Those are all good
increasing
statements.
demand.
I agree with that. My question was, does it not concern you we don't have the ability to meet this very specific need expressed here? He needs 2,000 more troops today in addition to the 3,200.
I recognize the need, I
concerns me.
recognize the desire. I also hope that we're able to get additional support from our coalition partners in Afghanistan.
General Conway, we had a discussion here yesterday with Admiral Olson on the Special Forces, and there seems to be a fairly vigorous discussion going on in the Army about who should be responsible ultimately for foreign internal defense, the general purpose forces or their special ops forces. What's the status of that discussion within the Marine Corps?
Sir, we, of course, the MARSOC, the Marine component to Special Operations Command, is about equally divided between what we call shooters, the MARSOC companies that have routine deployments, and we have one right now in Afghanistan, and groups that do foreign internal defense, companies that will do that for Admiral Olson. Beyond that, as a part of our growth to 202,000, we have examined the need for what we call a MCTAG, a Marine Corps Training and Advisory Group, that could be as much as 1,500, maybe a couple of thousand Marines that would give us that foreign internal defense kind of employment capability in the out years. We have not stood that organization up yet. We've only stood up a cadre of about 43 staff NCOs and officers to start to man it up. In the meantime, I have agreed with Admiral Olson and General Casey, and now we include General Mattis at Joint Forces Command, that there needs to be a discussion on who intends to do what. It is somewhat of a growth industry. We realize that there's probably going to be a need in the out years. The question becomes who does it and to what degree. The last thing I want to do is spend a couple of thousand Marines to create a capability who will then sit waiting for the phone to ring. We have better use for those people if, in fact, there's not an agreed-upon need on the part of force providers and at least one combatant commander who would be involved in the employment of those forces.
My last question, General Conway, is you have, I think, handled yourself very well in your discussions about where you think Marines ought to participate in Iraq versus Afghanistan. You've had a tremendous number of troops overseas. Based on the experience you've had so far as Commandant, where do you see language skills, foreign language skills, fitting in to this the whole? Well, you've got the long war sending the Marines. My question is, how many of these Marines should be sent in with very high levels of foreign language skills?
Sir, as you understand completely, you don't grow those people in a short period of time. What we have done is focus on the fact, and back to your last question, those types of people, people who would deploy to assist their world nations, are going to need some element of language skills. The 3,400 Marines that are going into Afghanistan are going to take over 120 interpreters and interrogators with them. So there's obviously a need to be able to fit into the culture and understand what's being said about you, either through individual language skills on the part of your service members or through help that we can gain from different locations. But we're working on it, certainly it's fair to say. Our language centers at Quantico are emphasizing to our young lieutenants that you need to pick a language, one of 4 that we will most likely find in probable deployment areas. We've got language instructors at our command and staff college. So we're making an across-the-board effort, really, to enhance language skills where we have previously been weak.
Thank you, gentlemen.
The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Virginia, Ms. Drake.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today. And Secretary Winter and Admiral Roughead, was wondering if you could give us an update on the status of the EIS for Mayport and looking at the nuclear capability, if that's something we want to look at, and also the financial analysis that we asked go along with that. So can you just give us an update where we are, when we expect any of that?
Yes, ma'am. We're proceeding along the original schedule. We expect to have the draft EIS out for public comment here in a matter of about a month or so. It is working through its final stages of development, and I expect that that will get us into the next phase of activity, getting the public comment. It does encompass the full range of options that we talked about last year, everything from no change to the current mission, surface combatant changes, amphibious changes, all the way up to and including a nuclear carrier. And it does address the range of environmental issues associated with that. We've also done some preliminary cost analyses associated with the investments that would be required at Mayport. Again, they vary significantly depending upon the specific option that's to be taken. We would not make that specific recommendation, of course, until we are able to factor in both the cost issues and the mission-related aspects that I'll be looking to the CNO to provide a recommendation on.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary, I'd also like to ask you, in your opening statement, you said that you needed increased authority to pay bonuses to doctors and nurses, where in the law last year, in the National Defense Act, we authorized up to $824,000 for signing up for a 4-year commitment. So I was just curious if you could clarify for us what else you need.
I'd be happy to give you the details for the record if I could, please. I think the principal emphasis I was trying to make was the value of those bonuses that we have received authority to utilize. They are providing a significant difference for us. Some of them take a little bit more time to affect the value out. The scholarship programs in particular are in that category, but I would note that we're getting some very good benefit out of all of those. We're approaching that period of time where students in medical school make their major decisions in terms of internship, residency, and actually acceptances into medical school as well. Once we see the results of that, which will inform many of their decisions associated with future careers in the Navy, we'll be in a much better position to be able to update our estimated requirements for future special pays and bonuses.
Thank you. And one last question for you, because I think you hear from this committee all the time how committed we are to the 313-ship Navy. We asked for the number, Admiral Mullen gave us a number, and our concern has always been to make sure that that stays on track. But listening, of course, to the debate and the questions, and this is a question I've had since I've come to Congress, I'm sure all three of you would be very happy and welcoming if we could figure out how to give you more money to make sure it stays on track.
Yes, ma'am.
It boils down to that.
It does boil down to that. I would note that if you take a look at our 30-year shipbuilding plan, where we are right now, and the glide slope that we're on to build up to that, we're actually doing pretty well with one exception. We've had to slow down a little bit on the littoral combat ship, which is a major component of that 313 ship fleet. It's 55 of that 313. We had hoped to be at a higher rate of production than we believe that we're ready for at this point in time. That said, I think that the approach that we've taken, which is a more gradual development process, more studied development process, gives us a much higher degree, much higher likelihood of success in the overall program activity. We have authority for one LCS in 08. We're seeking authority and funding for 2 additional in 09 that will enable us to go out on a 3-ship acquisition program, which will maintain a competitive base and enable us to proceed on course to be able to provide this critical capability, which is uniquely needed by the Navy. And I'd ask CNO to comment on that need.
As we've talked before, the littoral combat ship does not replace something that we have. The littoral combat ship is addressing a gap in our ability to operate in the littoral regions and archipelagos, areas where we need shallow draft, speed, and the ability to reconfigure the ship for the different missions it will undertake. Having commanded in the Atlantic and Pacific, getting that ship into the fleet is one of my highest priorities. And I have visited both of the ships 2 times in the last 8 months, and I remain more committed to that ship than I was when we began.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. McIntyre.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to all of you gentlemen for your commitment and your service to our nation. We're very proud of you and your work. General Conway, I was excited, as I mentioned to you before the hearing, to be at the groundbreaking of MARSOC at Camp Lejeune a couple of weeks ago. We're very proud of the Special Forces being set up there at Camp Lejeune and the growth of the Marine Corps that I know is going to continue at Camp Lejeune. Sure. And we see that as part of a greater growth in eastern North Carolina with BRAC and what's happening on the other end of my district at Fort Bragg as well. Secretary Winter and Admiral Roughead, we are very excited about your coming to Wilmington for the commissioning of the newest Virginia-class attack submarine, the North Carolina, the first weekend in May. And I'm sure we're going to have an outstanding crowd of folks there to welcome you and to show our pride in the Navy, in the new North Carolina. And I want to ask you, gentlemen, if you could answer me a question. I know a concern about this was expressed by your predecessor, Admiral Roughead, and some others on the Joint Chiefs in the past about what is being done to counter China's growing fleet, and what is our strategy to deal with counterbalancing China in the Pacific? There's been a great concern about this kind of being, if you will, overlooked or ignored somewhat because of the emphasis we obviously have in the global war on terrorism and what's going on in Afghanistan and Iraq. But can you tell us what attention is being paid to the China fleet and what we're doing to counterbalance that?
Yes, sir. As having been the Pacific Fleet Commander and having served in the Pacific for several years, watching the evolution of China's Navy has been of great professional interest to me, and then obviously in my positions out there, of great import to the Navy. There is no question that China is building a Navy that is increasing in sophistication, in capacity. It is a Navy that is focusing more on being able to influence events in the region and then being able to move onto the global stage. As I watch what they are buying, what they are building, that's one component of watching the PLA Navy, but the other is their leadership and the expertise and competence of the leadership. I've had the opportunity to meet with several of the PLA Navy leaders, and it is clear to me that that they have a path that they see for their Navy. It is a path that does not necessarily end with them being a threat, but it is a Navy that I believe will have greater influence in the Pacific and then also moving into the Indian Ocean regions. The key for us is to be able to engage with that leadership, to gauge the intent not only of the PLA Navy but the PLA, and to have a relationship that allows us to see where they are taking their Navy and how competent that Navy is. As you know, we have shifted force structure into the Pacific, carriers and submarines, but I would submit that that's not simply because of a rising PLA Navy. It is because that is part of the world, that and the Indian Ocean region and the Arabian Gulf, where our prosperity hinges on. And that is the reason why I believe a rebalancing of the fleet into those areas where we can respond, where we can be present, is so important. And it is from that response and presence that I am committed to the 313-ship Navy, because of our need to be able to cover the many requirements that are there, not simply at the high end of naval capability, but also to be able to work with some of the other countries.
Thank you very much. Is it fair to say that the Navy is embracing missile defense as a core mission? I welcome your comments or the Secretary's on that.
I see it as being a core mission of the United States Navy. We have had great success. I believe the shooting down of the satellite 3 weeks ago demonstrates the competence, the fact that our ballistic missile capability exists within our operational Navy. It is not a science project that's been going on. These are our sailors who are out there that were able to take on that mission, very complex mission, and succeed on the first shot. I believe that with the proliferation of ballistic missiles around the world, that ballistic missile defense and the flexibility that a maritime ballistic missile defense provides is a good solution for the country.
I would add that, building on the last point to the CNOs, that the flexibility that we have operating from a naval platform to be able to pick the geometry of our choosing has significant leverage in terms of the efficacy of any deployed system. When you add that to the capabilities that we've been able to build into the Aegis system, I think you have a unique and very significant way of enhancing the force posture of the United States.
Thank you. I see my time is up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Franks.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and as always, thank all of you for what you mean to this country and allowing us to sit here in peace and have these kinds of conversations. You know, Admiral Roughead, your comments and Mr. McIntyre's questions related to the missile defense kind of leads perfectly. I want to just, I know you've been congratulated a number of times here today on your successful shoot down of the satellite, and I just congratulate, you know, those on the USS Lake Erie and the USS Decatur and the USS Russell as well, and I had hoped that the Shiloh would be the one that shoots it down, because I had just toured the Shiloh in Japan with my friends Mr. Aiken and Mr. Larson and Mrs. Tauscher, and of course it was a magnificent display. We've worked with Japan to see their first shoot down in December themselves. I mean, I know that they've done things with us in coordinating it, but to do that by themselves shows that they had a very good teacher. And so I just can't express to you how good you make a lot of us feel to be Americans, and how proud we are of you. With that said, you know, Dr. Winter and Admiral Roughead and General Conway, I'm confident that I believe we're going to win this long war related to terrorism because of, you know, the warriors like yourselves at the helm of the sea services. And I guess my concern is your ability to reset and prepare for the future while you're fighting and while we're securing the peace in that regard. And so, Dr. Winter and Admiral, your reset needs look to be about $10.9 billion, and your unfunded requirements about $4.6 billion. And General Conway, your reset requirements look to be about $4.7 billion, and your unfunded requirements at about $3 billion. And today, the defense budget represents significantly less than 4% of the gross domestic product, and slightly more when you add the supplemental appropriations. But that's a historic low for our nation, even so. And so I'd ask General Conway anyone that wants to, but both Admiral Roughead and General Conway, I'd ask both of you, in the long run, will the defense spending set at a minimum of 4% of GDP be enough to satisfy and fund all the things that you must do to maintain and reset the U.S. Navy? And Admiral Roughead, I'd start with you. Will 4% GDP be enough?
Sir, I believe 4% is a good approximation and a good bar, if you will. But I also believe that it's important to not peg exactly to 4%, because we don't know what the future holds. We don't know what the challenges will be to our security and our prosperity. And I believe what is important is that we are able to look at what that future is, what we believe we need to provide the country, and then we budget to that amount. It has the potential to be a double-edged sword.
I know it does, and I guess, and General Conway, I'll direct the question to you as well. I just think that, you know, what happens is there's always this discussion about a peace dividend after any conflict, and it seems like the services always are the ones that are called upon to take the hit. And yet, if we are considered in the world as a hollow force, it costs us so much more in the long run. I mean, 911 cost us, hit our economy for somewhere in the neighborhood of $1 trillion. And it just occurs to me that, you know, a secure country is a very prosperous country. So, General Conway, and let me rephrase it, as a minimum floor, is 4% GDP a good policy for this country in your mind, sir? And will it to meet the needs with obviously the desire to respond with higher amounts if necessary?
Sure,
something for predictability.
I would highlight, first of all, that we are in war, and it is going to be, I think, a generational struggle. And 4% represents about half the lowest we have seen previously in any other war in terms of portion of GNP. My concern is that we have been treated very well with regard to our reset. Our total costs have actually exceeded over $15 billion, but the Congress has been very good about staying up, and we're confident about the rest of that. My concern about my particular service is that through delays in the Osprey and through the EFV, through some developmental concerns, we have a lot of bills coming due all at the same time here in just a few years. The Osprey, the EFV, the Joint Strike Fighter, the remands of the Cobra and the Huey. All those things are going to come at us all at about the same time. And as a member of the Joint Chiefs, I am concerned about the size of our Navy and about the age of our Air Force. So there are a lot of things out there, sir, in the future that are going to pressurize the amount of money that we have today. And I'm not sure 4% will be enough, quite frankly.
I appreciate your candor. Thank you.
Connecticut.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank the witnesses for their endurance here today. Secretary Winter, I also just want to attest to the fact that your Chief of Naval Operations is such a hands-on leader that he was in charge of flooding the graving dock up at Electric Boat about 2 weeks ago for the USS New Hampshire.
So noted, sir.
And so far, it's still...
I had a good partner to do it.
That's right. So thank you again for your appearance here today. Following up on Chairman Skelton's comment earlier about the fact that Congress in the past historically has helped sometimes set the pace in terms of the nuclear Navy and special operations. I think last year's budget, where the Sea Power Subcommittee under Mr. Taylor's leadership set the pace in terms of an advanced procurement towards a second submarine, the $588 million that we were able to get through the process. And again, I want to thank Secretary Winter for giving us the roadmap in terms of how to get to that point, which I think you had to step out a little bit in terms of the budget that you were presenting to us at the time. So again, thank you for your help. And but I did want to sort of follow up on sort of the question that's begged from that, which is, why did the Navy decide to use that advanced procurement towards a 2011 two-sub-a-year pace as opposed to 2010?
Thank you for the question, sir. Really two reasons. First of all, we didn't want to go to 2 a year and then back to 1 a year and then up to 2 years, just afraid of the perturbation that that would create for the industrial base. We could not afford, within the budgetary constraints that we're working in, two additional submarines. Second of all, we are entering into a period here where we have some significant cost savings that we're starting to accrue based on some of the investments that have been made in the Virginia-class program. We want to be able to affect as many of those as is possible. The new bow redesign, for example, is a very significant modification I believe is going to provide us with a lot of value for the future. We want to be able to take full advantage of those design activities and the reduction to practice on the overall Virginia program. And those were the two reasons why we put that submarine in 2011.
Well, and with that in mind, and obviously, again, Mr. Taylor has a lot of balls he's juggling in terms of trying to get a budget and an authorization through this year. Do you have any suggestions or ideas about ways that we can, again, take the progress that we accomplished last year and use it, you know, with the goal of reducing the construction period for the 2011 sub, again, in terms of what we can do this year, maybe not with as large a step as last year's, but again, is there a way that we can, I guess, keep the momentum going forward?
Well, I think one of the areas that I'm particularly focused on is the continuing need to be able to motivate the contractors to reinvest in their capital plans. And I think that investments in those areas provide us with significant long-term benefits. I think that the Virginia-class program has been a good leader in that regard. I'd like to see further options being developed in that regard. And I'd also like to see that construct, if you will, expanded throughout the rest of the shipbuilding activity with some of the additional flexibility that we would need to be able to take advantage of it. I'm also, I will tell you, having started the reevaluation of what we need for the SSBN class replacement, recognizing that that's coming out a number of years from now, but that is a significant effort. We are going to be bringing forward as part of the 2010 POM the initial phases of that activity. Right now it's principally an effort between Navy and STRATCOM to develop the overall requirements for that. But I think that that will also generate some significant pressures for a new generation, if you will, of submarine designers, and facilitating the, if you will, intergenerational transfer of knowledge and experience between those who have helped us in terms of designing the LA-class Seawolf in Virginia, as well as Ohio, into the next generation that we're going to need to be able to continue this effort all the way through to the Ohio-class replacement is going to be a critical factor.
My time's about to run out, but just, and we may maybe follow up again afterwards.
Sorry, please.
But there was, again, some of that 09 money last year, or 08 money last year, was for advanced funding for construction. And that's sort of, I guess, the question I'd like to explore further with you about ways to, like I said, keep the momentum going with the advance last year.
I'll be pleased to have that discussion with you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you.
Thank you to witnesses.
I recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Conaway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, gentlemen. Appreciate your service to our country. General Conway, one of the traditional core competencies of the Corps is the amphibious landings opposed, I guess, under fire. You mentioned briefly the EFV, excuse me. And you talk to me a little bit about when's the last time we looked at, is that a competency that the Marine Corps really needs to have? In other words, over the next 20 years, do we look like we're going to have those kinds of fights where we would need to have an awful lot of money put into the gear to be able to do that? And then talk to us a little bit about the struggles with the EFV in terms of continued mission creep and adding weight to it and all those kinds of things.
Sir, let me start by saying if you have a visual of the Tarawa landing beach, you have the wrong impression in mind of how we would intend to do future amphibious operations. We would intend to go where the Navy is not. We would intend to go deep across the beach with the Ospreys. But the expeditionary fighting vehicle is a vital part of that. The Navy, rightfully, will not go closer than about 25 miles to an enemy shore. Because of the anti-access systems and the potential destruction of Marine sailors and ships costing billions of dollars. So we have to somehow bridge that difference. We have a vehicle right now that ostensibly could swim, although the sea states would make that exceedingly difficult, but it would be 4 to 5 hours getting to shore, and Marines would be in no condition to fight. So we need that type of vehicle that can get up on top of the waves at 25 to 30 knots and get us quickly in to start doing the work that must be done. I think that there's a lot of blue out there on that map in the arc of instability, and that although we've been fortunate in years past that there was a host nation willing to accept a buildup and then willing to let us cross their border, the probability of that being present in every case in the future is not likely. And so I do think that there will continue to be, for this superpower nation, an ability to have a forcible entry capability.
Okay, when you talk about you've justified the EFV, what are the struggles to getting it operational?
Sir, we've had some reliability concerns. I fault our service, I fault the vendor for doing reliability tests on vehicles, 6 vehicles, that were already past their service life expectancy. So I personally don't believe that the program or the vehicle that's associated with the program is in as bad a shape as perhaps those tests might represent. The Secretary of the Navy, and I hope you'll comment, sir, has been very active in trying to look at stimulation and making sure that we've got the right model for the vehicle as such. But I tend to believe that the program is substantially back on track, delayed some, and that makes me uncomfortable because we need it today. But nevertheless, will be the vehicle of our future. By the way, sir, if I could add, I'm going to China at the end of the month. I'll ride on one of their new amphibs and come ashore on their EFV.
Sir, just to build on the Commandant's comment there, when we went through the initial evaluation phase early last year, the EFE passed the vast majority of its required objectives. The one area that, as the Commandant pointed out, we had some significant problems had to do with the reliability. This is a fairly complex vehicle, has a number of systems, a number of potential failure points. We made the decision that rather than to proceed into production with a vehicle that might pose problems in terms of maintaining that vehicle and providing the availability on a seaborne platform, that we would enter into a period of time where we would make an investment to design for reliability, to go through and analyze the vulnerabilities from a reliability perspective on the platform, to make the changes that are needed, and to ensure that we have a design which is both reliable and maintainable before we go into production. I believe we're making very good progress in that regard. We have a preliminary design review coming up here very shortly this spring, and a critical design review that will follow that.
Okay. And one other real quick one, Mr. Secretary. In a follow-up for the General, you mentioned that you said the 6 that were tested were beyond their useful life, which I'll get back with you on understanding how we had something that's being tested that's already worn out. But how many, you get to get 313 ships, how many new ships does that, I mean, do we decommission any of the current fleet to get to the 313? How many total new ships does that represent?
Well, as we drive to 313, it's a combination of those that we're building, and as ships reach the end of their life, right, they come out. It is important that we get our modernization program in place.
But just it's 39 is different. Is that just the total number of new ships that will be built between now and 2019?
I'll get back to you on the exact, because it's a mix of going away, coming in.
Thank the gentleman, Mr. Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Conway, I want to know what that ride is like.
It's actually surprisingly smooth, sir.
If you get back to us about the Chinese EFE, that'd be
Yes,
great.
sir.
Thanks. Secretary Winter and Admiral Roughead, give you a heads up on my question. I wanted to, if you could let the committee know the answer to the question. I'll preface it. The Navy and the Air Force have had an MOU that expires in, I think, 2012 with regards to the use of your expeditionary airplanes for jamming, radar jamming, and that MOU goes to 2012 with the assumption that the Air Force is going to follow up, I think, have a standoff jammer in place. That's not going to happen. And there's conversations about where the Air Force is going with the core component jammer, and there's next generation jammer conversations going on between Navy and Air Force. But the question is, what happens at 2012? We've got the air wings, we've got the carrier-based prowlers, soon to be the growlers, which are already high demand, low density, and yet it's the capability that we have, that the military has. I think the concern is that it's going to be higher demand and lower density post-2012 until such time there's an answer for the Air Force. What happens between 2012 and that time when the Air Force gets an answer about their jamming capabilities?
Well, sir, let me try to go through the status here right now. We are dependent on the EA-6Bs. That is the only electronic attack mechanism we have right now in theater. They're being used very extensively. They're doing extremely well. But we are concerned about replenishing them on schedule, given the service life limitations that we see on that platform. The build that we have put forward, which includes 22 growlers in this year's budget, in addition to the 5 that we requested in the 08 supplemental, is all based on what we think is the appropriate glide slope to replace the EA-6Bs, and also based on the latest analysis that says that we need a total fleet of 84 growlers to be able to accomplish the mission. I will note that that analysis was based on the presumption, as you noted, that the Air Force was able to provide a standoff jammer capability of their own to supplement those growlers. One of the things we'll be looking at as part of the Palm 10 development here in the next few months is to ensure that we understand what the Air Force plans are or not, and to ensure that we take that into account in terms of any necessary change to the fleet sizing for the growlers in the future.
So if I could summarize it, first off, I do not want to put the Air Force on the spot. We've talked to the Air Force about this as well. It's a broader issue in the Air Force about recapitalization and the available resources they have to do what they want to do. So I want to appreciate their problem. But to paraphrase, you said that at some point, right now, you're looking at, and at some point you will have to make a decision about whether 84 growlers or 85 growlers or 86 or something greater than 84 might be necessary to address the full mission needs of the radar jamming capabilities of the
yes,
military.
sir, and I do believe we'll make we'll take a crack at that as part of the 2010 POM.
Admiral Roughead.
Yes, sir, exactly right. And as you know, our electronic attack is being used in ways we never envisioned.
Right.
And I believe it will be important as we go into the 2010 POM that there be a realization of what that usage is likely to be and how the joint force comes at it. It will be important.
Thanks. And one more question. Your number one unfunded priority is P3
Yes, sir.
wings. Can you discuss the current status then of the P3s and what dollar amounts you're looking for, and how you're addressing the current fact that you've grounded, what, a third or so of the...
Yes, sir. We, the grounding is actually accounts for about a quarter of the fleet and about a quarter of the operational P3s that we have out. what has happened is we've been putting a lot of hours on those airplanes. They're beyond their flight life, but because we've been able to monitor the usage, we have a good sense of what the work will entail. We estimate that in '08 we'll need $364 million, and then in '09, $312 million to fix that.
So just to clarify, 364 million in the rest of '08. Presumably,
yes,
presumably you're requesting that in the supplemental.
Yes,
then?
sir. We will.
And then
312 in '09.
In '09, and that's not in the budget.
No, sir. It's not.
Thank you.
Thank the gentleman. Gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, Admiral General. I appreciate your service so much. I am particularly grateful that I have a son who is serving in the Navy, and he was trained by Admiral Roughead. So I'm very grateful for this, and indeed our family is grateful that he has had the privilege of serving with our troops in Iraq. Additionally, I'm very grateful that I represent Parris Island, the Marine Air Station, the Beaufort Naval Hospital. We've got wonderful facilities with wonderful people in a community that truly loves persons of military service. Additionally, last weekend, I want to give you a firsthand report. I had the privilege of visiting with our Navy and Marine personnel in Iraq and Afghanistan and also at Landstuhl. It was incredible. In Iraq, I had the opportunity, General, to ride my first MV-22. It was like a rocket. And I just want to commend all of you for your persistence in perfecting the Osprey and what it means for protection of our troops. We went to Fallujah. I was with the Marines as we were able to walk the market at Haditha, where through interpreters, citizens thanked the Marines for liberating them and keeping them safe. It was really a heartwarming experience. In Afghanistan, I had the opportunity to visit with Navy personnel who I'm really grateful are serving with PRTs. We were in Asadabad. The Navy lieutenant there was just bursting with pride at the bridge that he's building there. And it just made me proud. And I'm just, I agree with Congressman Franks. We're going to win the war against terrorism. I spent my whole life being told that we could not defeat communism, but we did. And I have the same feeling of what you're doing today. As we prepare, also in Iraq, I had the privilege of riding in a MRAP and Cougar, and it was just what a phenomenal vehicle that is. And Mr. Secretary, I know that at SPAWAR, they now are up to about 1,000 a month that they can process with the government configured equipment. Is this now a working system? I want the MRAPs to our Marines as quickly as possible.
Well, sir, thank you for the question. I think we've gone a long way to building up the industrial base to support the MRAP production and deployment. That includes not only a number of manufacturers that have been producing the basic vehicle, but as you noted, the SPAWAR activity that is integrating the government-furnished equipment, the communications, navigation gear, and all the other specialty equipment that goes on to those vehicles. I think we're now at a very good production rate, and we are actually shipping a large number of them on a weekly basis. We fully expect that we'll be able to meet the build-out objectives that have been established by the Joint Force. Marine Corps is in particularly good shape given the recent adjustments in terms of the requirements that have come forward. We still have a ways to go as the joint service provider of this equipment to satisfy some of the Army requirements, and we're endeavoring to do that.
And General Conway, the Marine Corps, we're very grateful, trains more than half of its recruits at Parris Island, including all the women who serve in the Marine Corps.
Gotcha.
We welcome more. And in fact, with FY09, adding 5,000 more Marines with additional Marines, is there anything that we of this committee need to do to help with infrastructure at Parris Island, or what's the status?
Sir, we feel pretty good about it. When I was visiting there last, we talked about extending some of the old barracks that are there that we thought would be torn down. I think we're probably going to extend their life cycle some, but they're suitable barracks. They will serve a good purpose. Where we need additional structure, and that will be during the summertime, of course, when we're training our high school graduates. We may need some temporary additional structures, but that money is laid in and is being provided for.
Well, I want to assure you, for the facilities we have the right climate in South Carolina, meteorological, and the people are warm. So you're welcome to expand. Thank you very much for your service.
Thank you, sir.
Thank the gentleman. The gentlelady from Guam, Ms. Bordello.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for including the importance of the military buildup on Guam in your opening statements. Mr. Wilson, you can have a few Marines, but we want the most of them. And we have warm climate and hospitable people in Guam as well. Secretary Winter and Admiral Roughead, I want to thank you for your testimony this morning and your leadership at the helm of the Department of the Navy. And of course, welcome to General Conway. You know that our community is actively preparing and planning to welcome an increase in the Marine Corps presence over the next 5 to 6 years. Leadership from military commanders on our island is very critical for the success of the civilian-military partnership and ultimately the overall military buildup. And I want to let you know that Admiral French is providing strong leadership as the commander of the Naval Forces Marianas. I have a few questions, though, this morning regarding the prioritization of Guam initiatives and projects within the Navy's budget and at the decision-making level inside the Pentagon. Secretary Winter, I'm concerned about the level of fiscal year 2009 MILCON funding requested for Guam. The President's budget has programmed $169 million of military construction work, which is about a 26% decrease in military construction spending on Guam over fiscal year 2008 levels. In conversations with officials from the Joint Guam Program Office and the Naval Forces Engineering Command, it was understood that Guam has significant construction capacity constraints. And as such, the military construction funding would need to be ramped up in the years prior to the bulk of the realignment projects to avoid challenges and pressures in the future. I was surprised at this year's decrease in the funding in the President's budget request, so I would like to have you comment on this. And if the Navy decreased its military construction dollars, was there an effort to work with the Air Force to ramp up their construction dollars, since they have a nearly $700 million unfunded requirement at Andersen Air Force Base? Their environmental impact statements are complete for the bulk of these projects. Is that an issue that would be coordinated through the Joint Guam Program Office? And if these projects are not better addressed, and if there is not more balance across these MILCON budget requests, I'm afraid the departments are setting themselves up for a pressure situation and a failure in some aspects. The construction capacity is limited, and significant activity at both installations is going to be difficult to manage all at one time in the out years without a gradual ramp up. We don't want delays. So I would appreciate your comments on this situation.
Well, thank you for the question, Madam. Relative to the overall build-up activity, as you know, our principal effort right now is in two areas, one of which has to do with the development of the Joint Military Master Plan for Guam, and the other is to develop the environmental impact analyses that go along with it, which give us the authority to be able to do construction. We're still roughly 2 years away from the completion of that environmental impact study, and so our ability to do any construction activities that are tied to that particular effort, to the move of Marines from Okinawa to Guam, is very limited at this point. We are endeavoring to complete out all the other activities in an appropriate course of speed. The three activities that constitute the mainstay of the $160 million that you referred to include the modification of the pier, the infrastructure investments for wastewater treatment, and I believe some barracks enhancements as well. Those are all part of what had previously been approved and is part of our planned program. We're going to continue to try to work that, and we're going to continue to try to make this as smooth as possible a transition, but we are limited by the current law relative to what we can do prior to the completion of the EIS that encompasses all of the construction activities associated with the move of the Marines.
So what you're saying then, Mr. Secretary, is that we should see large increases by 2010, 2011, after the EIS is completed?
Yes, ma'am. Once the EIS is completed, and we'll be programming for that completion in the appropriate time period, then we will be able to lay in the construction activities appropriately.
I have another question for you, Mr. Secretary. Just last week, the President's Interagency Group on Insular Areas, known as the IGIA, convened for its annual meeting here in Washington. Following the IGIA meeting, the Guam Interagency Task Force met to discuss their progress on various aspects affecting the military buildup on Guam. And the charge of this task force is to work across the spectrum of federal agencies to help our government validate and identify federal funding sources to prepare for the military buildup. However, many of our local leaders, myself included, are frustrated by these meetings because while many issues have been identified, little action has been taken to date by the group by the way of a resolution or a roadmap for budget support as we go forward. So can you please comment on what steps the Department of Navy is taking to address these concerns, and are these concerns being raised to higher levels with the Department of Defense or even at the cabinet level?
Thank you, ma'am.
Please answer the important question.
Thank you, sir. I recently met with Secretary Kempthorne, who has the responsibility for the interagency coordination. We are working together to be able to escalate this matter up to appropriate principals level discussions within the interagency, and I fully expect that we will be successful in getting the level of attention that the matter requires.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. You know, we truly need to work as partners in this build-up, and like I say, I have a massive job here to work between the federal government and the local government, and so we would certainly appreciate any cooperation that you can give in this respect. Also, on the EIS question.
The gentlelady's time has expired. There will be a second round in just a moment.
Second round, all right.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, afternoon. A couple quick questions. Mr. Secretary, there's an 11th and 12th TAKE in the budget. The Congress funded the 11th TAKE last year. Why are you asking for money again for the 11th TAKE?
Sir, what transpired is as we had to restructure the TAKE program to reflect some significant increases in raw materials that had driven the cost of the earlier TAKEs up, we used the funds that had been appropriated in FY09 to complete the
How much money was that, sir?
I'd have to get back to you on the specific
I understood it was like about $225 million. So you used that money for cost overruns?
That was used for two purposes, one of which was to complete the funding on TAK 10 and also to initiate the advanced procurement activities on TAK 11.
Sir, my second question is that in this fund, the National Sea Lift Defense Fund, you're able to move this money around, contrary to if you buy a ship in the other funds. My question, I guess, is you have an amphibious assault ship in the NDSF funding. It's the new MPFF ship. For all intents and purposes, it's an LHA. The SASC staff had recommended, said that this was against U.S. code to place this vessel, because it's a combat vessel, into the NSDF fund. And it should be placed in the regular shipbuilding procurement, in a sense so that Congress has oversight before money is fungibly moved back and forth. Why didn't we follow that recommendation?
Sir, I'd have to get back to you on that question.
I bring that up. because it just seems to me that if we are having MPFF not be TAKEs, but be amphibious assault type of craft, potentially Congress should look at pulling that back over into the regular shipbuilding procurement, because you are able to move money fairly fungibly in the NSDF fund and not with the strictures from the congressional oversight. How come they dropped out the 13th and 14th TAKE, Mr. Secretary, or CNO? That's not in the budget this year?
That is subject to the final decision on the MPFF structure. That is something that we are currently under study and examination, expect to fully reflect.
But then why didn't you take all the ships that are in the MPFF concept out of the budget? Why just those two? Why not the LHA and the others? Let me follow. I guess my questions have to do with this. The Navy's historically been terrific, 5% cost overruns. And yet we've had LPD, LCS, we've talked DDG, or, 1,000, upwards of 100%. Last year, your fiscal year, your 30-year shipbuilding plan said it would cost $16 billion per year. This year, when you submitted the 30-year shipbuilding plan, it said it will cost $22 billion per year, correct?
It depends upon the reference years, but there has
Yes,
been
sir.
an
If you first take the first
adjustment
5 or 6 years, it's only $19 billion or whatever, 9%. But overall, your present procurement budget for shipbuilding is $11 billion. That means you're asking for twice the same amount of money for shipboard procurement. The Army is procuring more money, more of its program in the emergency supplemental than it is in the regular budget. You don't even include the 12 SSBNs in that 30-year shipbuilding plan. I guess my concern is several, that this effort, I think Mr. Duncan Hunter said it, but this effort to get shipbuilding to a certain number is going to take at least a doubling of the procurement from what I see. And potentially with these cost overruns, I don't know if it's best to have some of these assault vessels in the NDSF fund. And finally, why don't we have the 12 SSBNs in the 30-year shipbuilding plan?
Sir, a number of questions there. The SSBNs, as I mentioned earlier today, we're just right now starting the initial study, the requirements definitions for the future deterrent force. We've just initiated that activity in conjunction with STRATCOM. There are a number of open issues there. There's also some time to work that. We're talking about construction starts in the 2019 time period. So we do have the time to work out through these issues. That said, it's a very complex set of issues involving not only the
I wasn't talking. Got it. Thanks, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you.
Yeah, please finish your answer, Mr. Secretary.
It involves the warheads, the missiles, and the boats themselves. At this point in time, the analyses of the boats, the ships that would be required for construction is so immature that any cost estimate that we put in would be very of questionable utility. And so we elected not to put in just a placeholder.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
The gentlelady wants a second round. Gentlelady from Guam.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Mr. Sestak, we will have a second round as if you and Mr. Taylor wish to have additional questions.
I just have 2 short questions. Mr. Secretary, another for you. I want to emphasize the concern regarding the EIS for the Guam buildup. We were speaking about it earlier. 2008 is a pivotal year for planning and the EIS, yet I am aware that cooperating agencies lack the funding needed to undertake the research and provide the baseline data needed to analyze the alternatives as part of this process. Specifically, for example, and I am the chair of the subcommittee on fisheries, the National Marine Fisheries Service is stretched thin, has many priorities in the Pacific region, and internally lacks the resources required to fully participate in the EIS. I want to register my concern and urge the Department of Navy to help fund the work by the cooperating agencies. Can you comment on the status of cooperation and funding support between the Navy and cooperating agencies on the Guam EIS?
Thank you, ma'am. We're working together very closely, I believe, to identify the specific actions that need to take place and also to motivate the other agencies to engage and provide the appropriate people at the right times to be able to do this. But it is their responsibility to provide the funding for those activities. In many cases, the issue is as much the availability of key people as it is the financial resources. We're trying to motivate this through the interagency working group that has been established. I think we've gone a long way towards making it clear and communicating what the needs are there. And I think that the process of escalation that Secretary Kempthorne has been helping with will further that objective.
Thank you. This is not a question, but I hope we are looking at green building and alternative energy in this build-up, and this has to do with all of our witnesses as we go along. And then one last question to Admiral Roughead. In your prepared statement, you state that the Navy continues to review current and alternative carrier ports to ensure the strategic Navy force disposition. Is this a general ongoing review or a specific study or analysis? And if the latter, what is the timeline for the completion of this? And does this review include potential CVN home porting in Guam and/or Mayport, Florida?
Thank you, ma'am. What we are doing is to look at our fleet today and determine where the best and optimum locations are for that fleet. It's something that we do routinely and repeatedly, but I wanted, as I came into my current position, to take a look at, do we have our ships and our commands and aircraft in the right places? Because the world has changed a lot. And so my staff is working on that. The product that they produce will help us as we work on our fiscal year 10 budget. But I believe it's important that we look at how we're positioned.
Thank you very much, Admiral. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity for the second round.
You bet. Gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Taylor.
Thank you, gentlemen, for this marathon session. A couple aviation questions. Given that the Pratt & Whitney F-135 short takeoff vertical landing development engine has experienced 2 failures during testing, do you think it would be prudent to continue the Joint Strike Fighter's competitive engine program that was mandated in last year's Defense Authorization Act, but not provided any funding for the Department of Defense?
Sir, I believe that the problems that have occurred with the 135 engine, the Pratt engine, are not atypical, if you will, for a development program of this nature, and we do believe that they are understood and there are good plans in place right now to provide the corrective remedies that will enable us to use that engine appropriately in testing. I would note that for the Department of Navy, both the Marine Corps and the Carrier Navy, we do have a particular issue in terms of being able, having to go down to a single engine type for our fleet. The challenges of maintaining and sustaining those engines at sea are such that we cannot provide for multiple engine support on board either our big deck amphibs or our carriers.
Secretary, I think the question is more during the developmental
Yes,
stage,
sir.
whether or not we ought to be looking at 2 rather than 1.
Well, the point I was trying to get to, sir, is that the argument that is usually made in terms of recouping the additional costs of developing 2 engines is that one can make it up by having ongoing competition during production, a leader-follower arrangement. And while I'm generally supportive of leader-follower arrangements, in this particular case, we cannot affect that for Navy purposes, either for the STOVL or the carrier variant. And I think then the question comes is, do we believe the risks associated with the 135 development are such that we need to spend several $100 million a year extra to be able to maintain a second engine? And we do not believe that the risks here require that additional investment.
Second question is regard to the V-871. I guess this is particularly interesting because of the Air Force decision. It's currently experiencing significant cost overruns and unforeseen schedule delays. What's the department's plan for this program? How will the cost overruns be resourced to minimize impact on other Navy and Marine Corps programs? I'm told that the cost has increased by 67%. And a last question that was not supplied by the staff, but is a curiosity of mine. There is a practice that a number of corporations have engaged in recently where a company will reach an agreement with an offshore firm and structure their business relationship to where almost all of the profits flow to the offshore firm. It is referred to as a corporate inversion. And since most nations do not require income taxes on foreign investments and foreign profits, becomes a very clever way for an outfit doing business in the United States to totally escape paying corporate taxes or greatly minimize their corporate taxes. So a follow-on to the presidential helicopter is, does your organization take the time to see if some of these arrangements amount to a corporate inversion? And I realize the Air Force contract was not in your line of work, but coming from the corporate world, I think you would be probably the most knowledgeable about that practice. And if you could tell me whether or not the DOD is being vigilant on this, because we certainly don't want to create a situation where an American firm is put at a cost disadvantage because they're good citizens and pay their taxes.
Well, sir, a number of questions there. Let me first go to the question of where we're proceeding on the VH-71. The increment 1 is proceeding as previously planned. We're getting the first articles there. They're into test. We also have one article up at Owego that is being missionized, if you will, with the incorporation of all the unique mission equipment that is required for this particular program. And we're continuing that development ongoing. We are taking another look at the increment 2 options there. I expect that we'll be able to get some clarity on that in the very near future. The specific allocation of resources for increment 2 in the 09 submittal is to ensure that, notwithstanding which option of several that's chosen for the future restructuring, that we have the ability to minimize the schedule impact associated with the current hiatus of activities there. So we have a pretty reasonable course ahead of us for increment 1, and we'll be looking at increment 2 here in the very near future. Relative to the specific questions on the assessment of the proposals involving foreign sources, I have to tell you that I'm not at all familiar with any of the evaluations that took place on the tanker program. I very deliberately gave that a wide berth.
Mr. Secretary, how about on this program? Did anyone even bother to see if there was a corporate inversion? I'll use the word scheme.
Sir, I hate to use the term, it occurred before my watch, but all of this transpired well before I took the position. I'd be happy to go and, for the record, do the research and see what we in fact did.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Hunter has follow-up.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. First, I want to apologize for being out of this hearing for such a big piece of the hearing. And again, gentlemen, thank you for your testimony, and you've got major challenges here in front of you. I guess two things, General Conway, as we move those Marines to that southern AO in Iraq, I think it's important to have a little follow-up maybe on rules of engagement. I know we've had a discussion on that, but in the event that they're chopped to a ISAF commander, and there may be some differences, which could be telling differences. I think it's important to resolve how those rules of engagement would devolve. Let me ask you, gentlemen, since it's kind of the close-up of the hearing here, is there anything that
may I interrupt?
Absolutely.
Would they not? Let me ask a question. Would they not still be under American rules of engagement?
Sir, that's the intent, as I understand it, and quite frankly, we're pleased with that arrangement. We think it gives us more flexibility to do what we're expected to do if we stay under U.S. rules of engagement.
Thank you. Excuse me.
Yeah. Well, yeah. My only question is that if the Marine, and I meant to say Afghanistan, not Iraq, but if the Marines are chopped to Canadian commander in that southern AO, and he is there under his command, we better have a pretty clear line of communication that he has taken on for that piece of his force a different standard, and if there are some material differences in rules of engagement, and make sure that that's in fact implemented. But anyway, I think that needs some further discussion, and we got to be pretty careful as we walk down through that.
And it's being sorted out in theater, sir, between General McNeil and the Canadian commander, frankly.
Okay. Okay, good. Let me just ask you a last question here, Secretary Winter. And again, thank you for all your issues you're working here. Are you have you worked through these problems that we've had with training submarine operations and the environmental challenges that we've had in the courts?
No, sir, we're still engaged there. In fact, as a result of the latest set of rulings in the Ninth Circuit, we expect to be filing here shortly in front of the Supreme Court.
Okay, you know, Mr. Chairman, we thought we'd protected our folks with the changes we made in the environmental laws, because at one point you had environmental laws that were interpreted to if we disturbed marine mammals, that is, if a seal that was cruising looked over at the naval operation, that could constitute a quota disturbance. We had a very low standard and a very difficult standard for the Navy to meet on these operations. We thought we fixed it. There may be, Mr. Secretary, there may be additional measures that we need to take, maybe some tweaks on the law that will avoid a lot of problems and save some sailors' lives. So,
sir, I'd appreciate the opportunity to work with your staff to take a look at some potential legislative options there.
Okay, I think we should look at that closely. Again, thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing, and I apologize for being absent in such a large part.
Thank the gentleman. General, Dr. Snyder asked about this issue, but let me raise it again. The 3,400 additional Marines that are being sent to Afghanistan will arrive approximately when?
Sir, the end of this month and become operational the very first week of April.
Of that 3,400 Marines, from the testimony, it appears that still will not cover the required number of trainers for Afghanistan. Am I correct?
Sir, that is also correct. There's been a standing request for forces to both U.S. and coalition force militaries for 3,500 police trainers. That has gone unmet now, actually, for several months at this point.
And of the 3,400, only a handful will be allowed because of the duty requirements. Only a handful will be involved with training. Am I correct?
That is correct, sir. The platoons will be broken down into various locations at the district headquarters where the Afghan police will operate. But in terms of people with the necessary skills to train those Afghan police, that will generally not be resident in our platoons. That will be a capability that's brought in, and the numbers won't be great.
Should there be a requirement for additional Marines in Iraq after the 3,400 are deployed to Afghanistan? Will you have any Marines to send to Iraq?
Sir, we have Marines to send in the case of extremis. However, if we are to maintain any semblance of deployment to dwell, then we must be concerned about any additional requirements. We should be headed the other way. We're trying to get to a 7-month deployment and 14 months home. And we're certainly not going to do that through October. Any additional commitment of Marines to Iraq or Afghanistan would only exacerbate that, and I would like to be looking at reducing the requirements.
Well, they do phenomenal work, and they should know how much we on this committee appreciate their efforts and your leadership. The in-strength issue was discussed in this committee with the Air Force, where the budget asked one thing and the Secretary's personal opinion was something else. It appears that you are heading to level out the Navy at 322,000. Am I correct?
Yes, sir.
Sure.
And you're at what, 325,000 today? Is that correct?
It's 333 right now.
It's around 333 right now. By the end of this year, we'll be down to about 327 is the goal.
This year?
Yes, sir. FY08 end.
And then you get down at 322 roughly when?
It's about a 5-year glide slope to get down the last 5,000, sir.
And that's done through attrition, I take it?
Basically, yes, sir.
Sure.
You won't be just throwing people out?
No, sir.
No, sir. And as people retire or leave to go back to their civilian job, that will take care of that. I thank you. General, one last question. There is an exceptional family member program. Does that include families with autistic children?
Yes, sir, it does. Mr. Chairman, about 3% of our Marines who are married are signed on to our exceptional family member program. And our first issue with those families is, the term escapes me, asthma-related types of disabilities. Second are psychiatric, but third on the list is autism.
Thank you. Well, gentlemen, thank you for your patience, your knowledge, your dedication, not just to the Navy and the Marine Corps, but to our country. With that, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.